Welcome to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John Mickton. Dan is away this time. I think all of us, as you know, we've just had the summer, we've relaxed, and it's a chance to get some respite, maybe disconnect, travel, maybe meet some friends and family, and then we come into a new school year. And new school years always are full of promise, of anticipation and excitement. Often people come to a new school, or you have new faculty, you might have a new school head. There's just a lot of newness, and there's some transition, and maybe in your own role, you're new. And with that comes a lot of excitement, and you start dreaming big, and you think of all the things that you can do and all the possibilities that are in front of you. And today, I think one group or one area of a school that's always really quite critical is the whole digital infrastructure, the IT systems, the IT pedagogy, the digital fluency, the library media services. Those play a more and more important role. They've always had a role, but I think with the situation that we're in and the prominence of digital ecosystems in our day-to-day lives, how they impact us in our social dynamics and also our professional dynamics, the role of an IT director. And I'm just using that label, which is very generic, and everybody has different permutations of that, but we're not going to go into that. But I'm just really excited because we have two really fantastic people that have done amazing work in their respective schools and have been in a lot of prominent schools around the world. And Christina and Charlotte have been so kind to come, and they have that role where they're managing not only IT systems, but the pedagogy and kind of the strategic thinking, part of the senior leadership team. And then they have a team that they support and they work with that really helps schools often deliver some of those aspirations and those dreams, because so often those today are really connected to some digital system, be it a laptop, an iPad, or an ecosystem like a student information system or some data, AI, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, enough from me. I'm just so honored and such a privilege to have you both here. Christina, welcome, and Charlotte, welcome, both of you. And as we do always, we always start with a little bio so people have a context of what your role is and where you are. And then we'll kind of dig into some of the themes about what does a new academic year look like in 23-24 with everything that's happened in the past? And we'll go from there. So Christina and Charlotte, a warm welcome, and off you go. One of you, I'll let you, whoever wants to start can start.
Thanks so much, John. It's really, really a pleasure to be here with you and with Charlotte, especially since I've had the good fortune of being able to work with you over the years in my career and have learned so much from both of you. I'm Christina Devitt, and I'm currently the director of, as you said, we all have interesting titles, Learning, Innovation, and Technology at the American Community School in Abu Dhabi, where I am now finishing up my second year, I have a week to go. I consider Brooklyn, New York to be home. And I've been working in technology, educational technology, going on 3 decades now. Sounds better to say that than the actual number of years. I started at an independent school in Brooklyn. Then I went overseas for the proverbial 2 years. And then close to 20 years later, I am now at my 4th international school. I have a background in computer science and philosophy, and needless to say, the computer science part has changed drastically in the time since I received my undergraduate degree. The philosophy part, not so much, but I think actually a little bit more important than ever. So that's just a little bit about me.
Thank you, Christina. Charlotte.
I too am honored to be here, and particularly as both of you have helped me out in a number of different ways, and I've learned a lot, so thank you. So I'm Charlotte. I'm the Director of Technology at the International School of Kuala Lumpur. Had just finished up my 4th year. This time around, I have been at ISKL before, holding a variety of roles, and also at Chinese International School in Hong Kong and the American International School of Muscat. And unlike Christina, my background is not in computer science. In fact, I was a business major. So my undergrad is in business. I worked at IBM, and I worked at one of IBM's big customers in computer centers. And then I worked in publishing at a visitor's guide to Chicago before I decided that I wanted to be a teacher. So then I became a middle school science teacher. And that happened in Chicago, where I was living, and did my master's, became a middle school science teacher, and then a grade 6 teacher. Transitioned into technology. Now, that was at the time when most schools had no computers or a few computers. I was teaching at a public school in Chicago, and we were one of the first schools. Well, my science lab was one of the first schools to get computers, and also to have what was then a modem line. So I too have been in technology for quite some time. And then after being a middle school science teacher in grade 6, then I transitioned to be a technology coordinator at a lab school north of Chicago. Heard about teaching overseas, came over again for I'll try this for 2 years. Went literally as far as halfway around the globe to start at the International School of Kuala Lumpur. And as I said, I was there for 11 years, holding roles: elementary tech, elementary assistant principal, middle school tech, power school, project manager, then director of technology, and then off I went. I'm back now. I was originally going to take a gap year after working in Muscat, and I found out that the role was open, and I was excited about where the leadership team wanted to take the school. I had been considering a gap year to just sort of question the role of education, really. And the senior leadership team really was talking about authentic, relevant, multiple pathways to learning, inclusive, and so forth. And so I ended up here again, and I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Yeah, and it's just so nice to hear these journeys and how, we always have good intentions only to go for a couple years, and there's something about the international world that really is very attractive and engaging. So one of the questions I'd like to ask, and kind of, you both are at the beginning of a new school year, 23-24, and you very likely already very busy and juggling a million things and feeling like the summer holiday never existed and it's vanished out into thin air. But what do you think? Because we've come out of COVID, and with the post-COVID, there are a lot of different things that have happened. The idea of well-being has become really amplified, the idea of balance, and then schools also have had to maybe relook at the way, what is their value added proposition in this world that's changing so much. And then last November, we had generative AI that suddenly showed up, and that has just shaken not only schools, but I think generally you're seeing an immense amount of traffic in publications, media, and different pundits, giving us doomsday scenarios or fantastic scenarios, and, navigating between these. What do you think, both of you, because of course you are part of the leadership team, so there's some strategy, there's some visioning going on, and there's also aspirations tied to that. What might be different? What are you maybe doing differently this time round compared to other times? Because both of you are very in this field. What maybe has changed a bit? Charlotte, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's really changed is, so we spent, at least at ISKL, so, the 2.5 years or so of COVID and what we called MCO, where we were very restricted. And prior to that, we had also been impacted by the haze in Malaysia. So there's been a good 2.5, 3 years of start, stop, start, stop. And yet, through it all, we were still envisioning what is it that it looks like for us for the future. So all of this is going on, and we're still, yes, and how do we really educate for beyond university, right? Not just, okay, get into a good school kind of a thing. And so I think this year it was our first year, or sorry, the last school year was our first full year back on campus, and people had changed. If you think about it, you mentioned the social emotional learning, wellness, our awareness of balance, because during those COVID years, teachers, students, parents, everything was so intense. And so we've really intentionally, even last year and moving forward into this year, focused on what does that balance look like. The other thing that's a bit different is that this last year we were on campus and it felt a little rusty, and yet it felt like there were all kinds of opportunities, given that, well, wait, how do we do things? And it's encouraged us to really look and say, and how do we want to do things, right? Because we've had a disruption. And so I think that's poised us really well to go into this next school year. And what are we doing differently? I think we're being a lot more intentional about what is it that we need to focus on, that we want to focus on, and what is an opportunity for improvement and growth. We're also, all along, as well with COVID, of course, there's been a focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. And so what does that look like? And so we are embedding that within our social emotional learning curriculum, including digital citizenship. So there's all of those relations. And again, being very intentional about what that looks like. Then you throw in AI, Chat GPT. I think what it looks like is that there's these opportunities to really examine how we do school and what are the possibilities moving forward to really have personalized instruction, to reduce some of the load on teachers for things that might take a while, to be able to really differentiate, and to do so with a lens of, okay, and how are we also keeping students and adults safe and aware, and also thinking about things like, what about the bias, right? Having the metacognitive piece as well. And so it's an interesting time for us anyway to, again, be intentional, but it feels like there's lots of possibilities.
Nice. Oh, that sounds like a really good space to be in. Christina, you are not in Malaysia, but you are in Abu Dhabi. And so a different cultural context, different school as every school. What are some of your reflections on this idea of what 23, 24 might look like differently for you and your community?
I love that Charlotte finished her conversation talking about that sense of possibility, because I think it's hard to be in education and hard to be in technology, especially without always having possibility in your mind. That's, I think, what's so exciting about our jobs and our contexts. I also think that as I've been in this field for a while, I'm seeing technology become more and more contextual to the school and the culture that we're in. And so when I think about ACS, there are some things that are foundational that carry through from year to year. Now, again, this is only my second year. I'm finishing up, starting my third. And like Charlotte, what I've noticed in the past 2 years, this year was really the first year where we came back to what we called post-COVID normal. And had a similar question around what do we rethink? This is an opportunity to do that. I think we all hoped we would do that more because of what we learned through COVID. But meanwhile, you know, we're rebuilding the plane as we're flying it this time. And so we've used the term strategic abandonment here and there, where we're really being thoughtful about what we keep and what we let go of. But there is that foundation which we're carrying with us. Those are ACS pillars. We have 4 pillars that sort of structure the learning that we expect at our school. We have athletics, academics, arts, and service. And so those are still our main values. And what we see is that technology and innovation really energize all of those areas, right? Amplify and facilitate all of those areas coming to life in a meaningful way and in a way that's appropriate. So the question we're asking now is, what does it mean to experience those areas, those domains in 23, 24? We have kids with their own YouTube channels already, right? We have kids with their own businesses already. I just came from last year, I saw a grade 3 or grade 5 business fair, and there were literally kids that had their own businesses already and their own websites set up. So our kids are empowered with this technology in ways that we certainly weren't when we were kids. And we need to think about that as teachers. Another thing that we're considering a lot is the new economy that we're in. We're in the experience economy now. We're out of the resource economy. And that means that we need to be preparing our students for it, and that when they come to school, they expect learning experiences. And we have to define what that means. So we're starting our year with two big things in mind. One of them is we are designers of learning experiences for all students. All of us are designers for every student, and they come to us from with different ideas, different experiences, different identities, and we need to make sure that we are aware of all of those as we design these experiences so that we can speak to them. And the other thing that we have on our minds is we're actually building a new campus. And so I know you've just recently been through that, Charlotte. We've had some conversations around it. And that's a big deal for us. I mean, we're literally moving to a purpose-built campus that will be double the size with not double the enrollment. That's intentional because we're very tight in the space that we've been in for 50 years. Our school has a long legacy. And it has a beloved campus in many ways, but we're super excited about the possibilities. And so what we're hoping to do this year is really leverage that transition as a way of innovating and designing learning experiences that take advantage of these new kinds of spaces that we're going to have. And so there's going to be lots of great dialogue and imagination and possibility that we're going to be exploring for the whole first semester. And then we're doing a mid-year move.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're going to have a lot on our plate.
Mid-year moves. Mid-year moves, yeah, they can be interesting. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right.
Wow. So your campus is already being built.
Oh yeah, it's well underway. So
wow.
It'll be exciting, around this time to see exactly if it's almost ready to hand over.
Nice. Okay. What's interesting about both of your descriptions and the way you've kind of shared your dispositions and kind of your thinking and your school community thinking, if we were here maybe 30 years ago and both the audience knew that you were IT directors, they would be like, well, what are they talking about? They're not IT directors. Well, they should be talking about systems and networks. And I'm wondering, because, we all have worked in this role in different contexts. Do you feel that role has it's a new role. It's a different type of a profile of a person that has to be in this role and what schools are looking for, because there is the whole IT component, and that's more the nuts and bolts, the systems, the networks, the firewalls, the security, the accounts, and, the student information system, which is kind of the mechanics, I'm going to call it. And then you both are really talking about vision, value-added proposition, strategic thinking, aspirations. What has happened to this role that you think this is, because I'm not saying this is unique, I'm saying this is really a new narrative for this role. And maybe you can talk to us, because both of you have worked in this role in different contexts. Why might have this happened? What is it about the world today that an IT director, and I'm using that as the generic term because you all have very unique, you all have different names. So we're just going to say the IT director. or directrice if we were speaking French, but we're not. What do you think has changed in the role? And schools obviously both have hired you knowing that that's your approach. And I'm just wondering what has changed, what has maybe given school permission to say, this is the profile, this is the disposition, this is the type of leadership we want.
I think, can I jump in, Christina?
Absolutely, you go for it.
So I think that initially when we were using technology in schools, it was very, we needed the technical. And even if you look at the way that the ISTE standards have evolved, at first it was like, well, what is it? Oh, how does it work? Oh, how do we use it? Right? And over time, we've gotten to the point of, well, first of all, it's a lot more complex than it used to be, right? But it's more, it's not the stuff, it's not the tools, it's not the shiny new thing. It's what are we doing with it, and what is the learning that we want to have happen? And so it's having that strategic and pedagogical focus. And then, and given that, what does the technology need to do to be able to support transformative learning versus, when tech started out, it would have been in a computer lab. It would have been isolated from whatever the learning was, right? I mean, there was still learning going on, but maybe it was computer science, or maybe it was, here, you're going to learn how to use Microsoft Word, right? But it is now, technology is so embedded in everything that we do. And, we were all probably part of conversations of, should we go one-to-one? Should we use technology in schools? Those questions are, of course yes, of course. And if we weren't, and if we were not also thinking again strategically and thinking about, we want our students certainly to be critical and creative consumers, but we want them to be producers. We want them to own it, right? So they're not sort of, the computer is doing this, or this is, no. Understand it and how might you utilize it to have impact. And so as we've transitioned and as I imagine people looking for, well, so what ought this role to be? We need to have that broad scope. And I know that in some schools, sometimes we still kind of have, you have the more technical IT and you have the edutech, right? Sometimes it's the two, and sometimes there's somebody overseeing the both. Personally, I still think the overseeing the both works well. But yeah, I think that's why. What do you think, Christina?
Yeah, I agree with you that having someone who can bridge both sides of the purely technical and the educational is important. And I think to some degree, I agree with your analysis, John, but at the same time, I kind of feel like from the very beginning, when technology appeared on the scene in schools, we actually needed to have people who understood both how to use the tool itself and the context of education. And maybe there was more emphasis on the tool because it was just so new. So I feel like the balance has shifted a bit now to less about the tools themselves and more about the purpose for using them, the impact they're having, the transformation, exactly all those words that you used, Charlotte. So I feel like the combination of, I'm sure you've heard the term consumerization of IT, right? I mean, everybody knows how to use their mobile phone. I mean, people probably sometimes think they know more about technology than they actually do.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and then COVID, I think, just did an amazing job of upskilling so many people in the use of technology for learning. So many of the tools that maybe were introduced during COVID have carried it into face-to-face learning, I found. So So now the conversation is about why are we using this tool? And I think it's also looking at our systems from a systems perspective. Do we just bring in, there's so much to choose from now. It didn't used to be like that. So now we're trying to do some sense making with our colleagues about what is the most impactful way to use technology for learning in our contexts. And then the topic of technology itself as, technology as learning, as a domain of study is also much richer and more complex and of great interest to students and importance to them. So I think, with our understanding of both sides, we're able to support the work and the curriculum in that area as well. So I feel like some of the same components are there, but the balance has shifted.
And you talk about this bridging. You mentioned this idea of bridging and this balance. So do you find in your role you are kind of keeping that equilibrium between focus on the hardware, the machines, and the pedagogy? You're trying to remind people, let's not focus too much on the system because we actually need to focus on the learning. Or sometimes we're focusing so much on the learning, we're actually not realizing that we have a system that's not really. So, I'm just curious, how do you juggle that? Because both of you are in your leadership teams, you have a seat at the table with the decision makers, and you really represent that. And often you are considered as the expert. People look at you when there's a cyber attack or whatever it might be. How are you balancing kind of keeping that equilibrium? Because I think Christina and both Charlotte, you really talked about the importance of that, but also that the shift is maybe more in the pedagogy because we realize that's really what we're about day to day.
Yeah.
You know what? Go ahead, Christina.
No, you go ahead.
So one thing that I've noticed that's been interesting is that so our ed tech team, we've been peeling away more of the IT sort of things. I mean, they still, there's an entry there for like tech support kind of stuff, but still focusing on that. What I've actually, and we've been actually a little bit intentional about it, is that the focus on pedagogy and learning and empowering our users and systems is having a big impact on IT. So we don't have a bunch of IT people who are just IT focused. Instead, everybody is focusing on what's the value. Everyone is also being more human-centric and really looking in more of a design thinking way versus here's a system, it's really good, here's the manual. I'm like, so it's really understanding the humans and what is it that we need to do. So there's a shift not only in the pedagogical sense and being intentional, but also in the IT realm to really develop things that work and have not only human-centric systems, but to be able to be more agile, be more automated, be more interconnected, just across the board. And so then that's having another knockoff effect in helping on the pedagogical side. So it's going back and forth. As an example, we do a Panthers teaching Panthers. Like it used to be a teachers teaching teachers, but now it's Panthers teaching Panthers. Panther is our mascot. And so it's all employees teaching, right? And so our tech support manager offered a chat GPT session. Initially, we thought he was targeting it to more of the operational staff, but in fact, a whole bunch of teachers showed up, and so he did the session. As a result, or partial result, then a teacher attended. A teacher dived into it, came back and said, I was at his session for this. I was doing this. So now we're having more teachers in quote unquote the IT sort of side,
Interesting.
which has been just phenomenally rich in
Yeah,
terms of
and I love
development.
the Panther thing because I think so often the IT kind of the techies often are in that dark room, and it's kind of the
Ooh,
metaphor.
no, no,
Yeah,
no.
yeah, yeah. But
Right.
that's exactly what it is. And Christina, how about yourself in your context in that balance?
Yeah, I think it is definitely something that people in our role need to manage. I think in an ideal world, what you've just described, Charlotte, where it's a true learning community and everyone is contributing in some way as bringing expertise and learning from one another, the more we can include our staff in those conversations, the better, and those opportunities. Because after all, our core business is being a school, and we want everyone to understand what it means to work in a school and apply IT in that context. At the same time, I think there's been sort of a natural division within our department where the IT side focuses a bit more on infrastructure and making sure that everything continues to work and almost is kind of invisible as much as possible, right? We want it to be reliable, robust, easy to use. And of course, with our new campus coming online, we're putting a lot of thought into what that's going to look like, how we can even improve upon what we have already. And then the other reality that I think, again, covers both sides of the shop is just how systems talk to one another, how data talks from one system to the other. There's a lot of data that we share, and we have to have standards for how we manage that data and where the single source of truth may lie. So those kinds of things go across both sides of the shop. And that's a big job in and of itself. There's just massive amounts of data that we're dealing with right now. Some of you, I'm sure, are further along than we are with that. So someone that I worked with when I was in Jakarta Intercultural School used to say that the job of being in IT is partly about managing expectations. And I think that describes what it means to constantly look for that proper balance, because everyone comes now with their own expectations for how technology should work or what they should be able to do with it.
Right.
And there are still systems perspectives that we need to bring to the table. And there are things that we can learn from those expectations. And so I think those conversations were the ones that are facilitating those and making sure that we take all of the ideas and implement them in a way that has the greatest impact on our schools and our students and our mission.
Oh yeah, and Christina, you're talking about when you started talking about data, that's a big one. I mean, data is gold, right? Data is whether we're protecting it from a cybersecurity standpoint, or we're thinking about data protection and privacy, GDPR, or as in Malaysia, the Personal Data Protection Act. All of that is, so there's the protection and how is that all laid out, and then there's all of the data in disparate systems. Like you said, how are we getting it to talk to each other? What's our flow? What's all that going to look like? And there's some really exciting work being done in probably everywhere, but certainly in international schools, looking at what are some tools that we're using to visualize and analyze data? What does that look like? What does that look like from a systems perspective where, sometimes we have one system that tries to do everything, or we have multiple systems that maybe don't talk to each other, or we have all of that and a bunch of spreadsheets, all of that kind of stuff. And so how are we pulling that together to have structured queries, to have safe data, to provide the kind of dashboards that we need, where ultimately to have it by, say, student. So a student has a dashboard with that data, right? So that they can own that. A parent, right? Here's my students. Obviously, teachers, admin. But then if you add the AI piece, how's my student doing? Right? It's exciting stuff. We're doing some stuff with we're definitely doing some stuff with that. We're not as far along as some other schools, but lots there.
Yeah,
It's
there's so much
interesting.
to do.
In June, we had the chance to interview Chris Smith, and he did a wonderful podcast about this issue of data visualization.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I think you both are, and in this little topic of data and systems talking to each other, the reality is that most users, they in their day-to-day life, they go to Amazon, they go to some social media, and it's very fluid, it's very seamless. So they have certain expectations the way technology works. It's invisible, I press a button, it happens, I don't ask questions. Do you think with that amplification of the expectation of the seamlessness and this always 24/7 on, that schools often the resources that they have, in other words, the human resources to manage the cybersecurity, to manage the databases, to manage all these things, do you think nowadays it's become such a big kind of entity that it's almost impossible to do it within the context of a school, and that's where you have to subcontract out? Can you really do all the digital security and all the cyber attacks? Can your team manage that enough, or are there tools now? I'm just wondering, how much are the tools replacing some of the human capacity? But also with all, if you're thinking of APIs, different databases talking to each other, visualization, and then you have to do the curriculum, and you have cybersecurity, you have recycling. I'm just, listing all these things that IT directors have to manage. Do you think it's sustainable, or is it re-looking at the way these departments and the approaches where there has to be subcontracting, or is maybe some of the AI really going to help us take some of the mundane tasks out of the way so we can focus on the bigger ideas? Christina, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly hope that AI steps in and helps us with some of this because, as you said, there's a lot to manage, and most of our staffs, I think, we could always use more people to help us with the amount of functionality that we try to maintain and the systems we try to maintain. I think probably every school makes different decisions, probably depending on the staff that they have, where their strengths are, where they want to invest in training. I have been at schools with really large staffs that can specialize in certain areas, and it's wonderful when you have that luxury of resourcing. Otherwise, I think it's impossible really to do the job without relying on some close vendor relationships, and finding the right vendors to partner with is, I think, another really important role of the IT director. And that's something that I've learned over the years and really appreciate when I find a vendor that I can work with that really supplements our team, or that actually helps to upskill our team in some way. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes it feels like certain, maybe networks become more reliable. Apple TV or MDM systems make management of scaling the management of devices so much easier. But inevitably, there are 5 more systems that get added on at the same time. And the skill set that's needed to manage all of the new things may not be the same as what was with the old things. So again, it's that making sure there's constant training and figuring out, like, for example, app development. That's something that we do. Some of it happens in-house by students. And that's, I think, the most exciting kind of development that can occur. But sometimes we need an app developed that's really specific to us. We have a partnership with a vendor that helps us develop apps when we need them. And I think those are the kinds of things that schools need to determine. What are the range of services that I need to provide? What can I do in-house, and how can I supplement?
Charlotte, any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely have again, working with vendors who we can form a partnership with is really important. I often say, and my team knows this too, like, even if it seems like we should add more people, that's never my first thinking. And I'm always, okay, hang on. What might we do with what we have right now to make it more systematic, to clean up, to think, instead of doing lots of one and done, and then you have 10,000 one and done, what can we step back and look at and say, well, hang on, if we do it this way, we won't have as many of those additional needs, and that will free us up. So looking at that. And then I think really empowering our teams to be thinking that way as well, and to be thinking, and certainly supporting them, but to be thinking, hey, this is what I always do. How might we make it easier? And engaging not only our IT teams, but really across the board, so that sometimes it does mean having this system or that system, and the additional systems. Sometimes it means outsourcing on skill sets and technical skills, right? Because particularly in IT, yes, there are skill sets, but with so much change and development and so forth, it's not really reasonable to expect that someone you hire for a need right now is going to have that same skill set or a different skill set and be able to just flip, right? Even likely you're fortunate enough to have the same high quality people that I do too, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, I think that the role of the director really is to engage not only their teams, but others as well, in really looking at that and really saying, okay, so hang on. And sometimes it's definitely at a very ground level. Oh, so show me how you do that. And you go, oh, wow. And I end up saying, same. Right? Because what someone might be needing to go through to do their job just seems just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We can do this. But when you sort of, and when you do that, it ends up that there's quote unquote more work, but it's for the good, right? And so you support your team in having those kinds of conversations as well. And then gradually the whole piece kind of shifts.
You just said some magic words for me, Charlotte, which are, how might we? And I remember last year, our team got together at the end of the year and said, one of the things that we do really, really well is we ask, how can we make this better? And I think establishing a culture, I mean, you want your whole school culture to do that, but particularly in IT, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in, is it working or not? Or I just need to get it done, because there are always, fires to put out. But if you're really starting to think about digital transformation, to use a bit of a buzzword, as a culture, within your team, I think you can really make a bigger difference. And I can tell you that it's funny when you said some jobs have shifted, over the 3 decades that I've been in this industry, networking has become a much more complex job than it was in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I don't have the deep knowledge anymore. I definitely rely on vendor partners and internal expertise in that area. Another area that I think is more important than ever, and I don't know if we're outliers, but I suspect not, is project management. There are just so many different projects going on. And they might be systems to implement. They might be data to port from one place to another. It might be a new campus to build and all that goes along with that. But there's always a project going on that involves technology, and having someone to support, because we're in a support role many times, to support whatever someone else's project might be, and make sure that it is accomplished, because inevitably technology is part of it. And then the other job that I have found is super, super helpful is something like a functional analyst, where that person is responsible for learning about a new system and really digging deep. They have to understand the context in which the school operates, and they also have to understand the problem that we're trying to solve. It's kind of akin to a project manager, and then really dig in to learn a system and figure out how it's going to work or not work in your specific context.
We actually, in my last professional situation, we hired a functional analyst when we brought in our student information system, and it was amazing because suddenly every time an email came, they were able to say, yeah, I know how this system works. Well, actually, I noticed that your schedule is such, so I think, so it's not often where you send to the IT person like, well, it says it, you can do it, work it out,
Right,
It's
exactly.
far more empathetic, it's far more engaged in understanding the culture that's asking the question and responding to that culture. You both talked about
That
this
is
idea.
really interesting. I think that my hunch is that while we don't have a role of functional analyst, so this is a new term, I think that we do have several functional analysts on our on my team.
On your team. Yeah.
Right.
I
That
think
end
it's
up
also a
playing that
mindset.
role. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a
Interesting.
mindset too, the way you approach it. You
Yes.
both were talking about, the skills and the dispositions. Robert J. Steinberg, who is a professor at Cornell, did a lot of work on what they call the adaptability quotient. And one of the things in the research that they found with people that are put into situations where they have to learn new things because there's accelerated change is they often point to their past as their point of reference, because that's where their experience is, that's very likely where the tools are, and they feel they have a toolkit from that past. And what they're realizing is that so often that actually is the wrong thing to do, is that you want to kind of disassociate yourself from those mental models of the past and really bring in completely new perspectives. But for humans, it's very difficult because there's a sense of almost like, if you can't honor your past, then there's a sense of less value. Your past is what kind of builds your reputation and your skill set. So it's just interesting to hear both of you talking about engaging with your teams and the professional development and keeping them fresh. Do you find that you have to spend a lot of time working on that mindset? As a leadership team member and as an IT director, you have some person that's involved with, say, migrating data from one place, and they said, well, we always did it this way, and this doesn't do it that way. How much do you have to actually be coaching people in the way they learn?
Well, I mean, I think fortunately, schools in general have spent a lot of time diving into the idea of a growth mindset and what it means to have one, and how important it is, particularly when the pace of change is sort of mind-boggling. I think that most of us don't just go back to our past mental models because it's a source of pride, but more that it's a source of comfort. It's something familiar. It's something we can build upon. And I think you're right that the key is to find people who are open to learning something new and not, I guess, getting too attached to that past, that mental model. And sometimes you can use aspects of it. You just can't take it wholesale and apply it to a new situation. So I think, I don't know, I guess I wouldn't say that it's specific to any role in my team, but in general, that's part of what we do in our role as IT directors is encourage people to consider a new way of doing things that might be different than what they've done before.
Yeah, and I think that actually in IT, we've been a bit fortunate in that there's always change.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And so there just is. And so people who are in IT, and perhaps even the reason they gravitate to it is there is change. So there's not necessarily that same kind of either comfort or looking back. They might look back and say, well, it has worked or whatever. But I think there's a degree of openness. And what I find too is then kind of how might we work with other teams, right? Who haven't been in, and I'm not saying change is like, woohoo, change is great, let's all change. But right, who haven't been in that sort of rapidly changing kind of realm. And what I find is that again, it's definitely the human centric of listening to what's going on. Yeah, people they want to do well, and they are doing well based on what they've been doing, right? But they also are, at least the people in our schools are like, hey, if there's a better way to do it, yeah, right.
You know,
sometimes we're actually not even asking, right? And so people are doing their jobs and they're doing them really well, and they're like, producing, and their bosses or their supervisors or whoever, they might not even know all of what this person needs to go through to achieve that. And then when you start kind of digging in and you're like, oh, wow, maybe we could look at making this easier, they're all for it.
Yeah, you just made me think about when AI hit the scene in November. I mean, there's an example where I was so impressed with our school community and their embrace of the possibilities that AI could bring. And there, I think there was more enthusiasm than fear. There was definitely there were reservations about what does this mean for certain kinds of assessments that we do. But I think, most people felt that we've needed to look at some of these assessments anyway. And some of it's driven by external entities that also are going to need to change with the way they think about learning and assessment. So to me, that's an example. I think we're all, especially coming out of COVID, right? We're all realizing that, there's a lot that's unpredictable, and one of the most important mindsets or skills to have right now is that ability to adapt. I mean, it's essential, right? With our world evolving the way it is.
And it's being able to adapt and support, right? Because the COVID change, whatever, takes a lot out of people.
It does.
Right?
Yeah.
And that adaptability, I think COVID did force a lot of that, right? And I mean, there've been a lot of positive. And one of my worries sometimes is that it is about the people, right? And supporting and really sometimes, even though we can, should we maybe slow down?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I want to kind of bring this thing, because we've been talking about skills and learning and adaptability, and this idea of growth mindset. There is amongst you see more articles than I have seen before where there's a sense that our children, the students that we have, are not digital natives. They absolutely know nothing about technology. They're very adept digital consumers and they can consume very well. But the ethics and some of the more mechanical parts of that are not being addressed. And I've talked to a few people. We even had a panel of digital coaches the beginning of this year in January. And the question was, do you think we've gone too far in saying, oh, let's let the teachers integrate it and we'll give them laptops, we'll give them iPads, we'll give them Google Classroom, whatever it might be, and we're good to go. But have we maybe gone too far? Is it the role, and many schools have computer science, and there's no doubt schools address that, but that's usually targeting a very unique audience. The students are maybe more predisposed or in their professional and ambitions, they know that they have to do computer science or robotics if they're going to go into engineering, or there might be some interest. What do you say to when somebody says that, kids are not digital natives, they're good digital consumers, and actually they don't know much about IT in the sense of the ethics and the mechanics? How do you react, and what might be some of your thoughts? I'm not saying this is a blanket truth across all schools, but I think there is some truth, because you're seeing more articles where pundits are saying we need to be far more deliberate about teaching Excel, or teaching some of these mechanics that often we think, oh, kids will work it out with a YouTube video.
Yeah, it's a great question, John, and I have mixed feelings about it. For the most part, I still believe that learning skills out of context is not as lasting or impactful. And so I think the question we need to be asking is, how can we ensure, or how can we identify what those foundational skills are that are likely to last or be at least transferable to whatever new evolution of technology might come along? How can we expose and give students genuine opportunities to use those skills in the context of whatever other classes they have? One of the things that we're doing at ACS, and they've been doing for a while, is we have a badging program, and students can choose to take an exploring technology class where they can select specific skills that they want to study in more detail. And those skills tend to represent a range of things that students would need to be creators with technology and actually do something impactful for the rest of their studies. And in fact, one of their highest levels of badge is where they're integrating the skill that they've learned into another class. And so that's actually, had, now it's not every kid is learning the same skill, right? There's a lot of choice involved. But that's kind of an important part of the equation too. And if you think about how we have all learned our digital skills, right? We've been learning them as we need them, right? It's sort of what we want to know and what we need to know. And I think combining those two things is always the most powerful learning. And we just have to be aware that that the technology skills need to be part of the mix when we're designing learning experiences.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Christina. And I think that this is a common tension kind of in our realm, where we want things to be authentic, but we also, at some point, we want to have every student have opportunities and access, right? And then it's not variable. This teacher is into it and this teacher isn't. And we're working on it. But I would say that we need to work on it more. And I think that, John, as you phrased it as ethics and mechanics, I think that the ethical piece in particular is one that, as we look at power and who has power and data and AI and all of that, and using it for the good, right? I think those are questions that we'll be continuing to grapple with, and that in some ways, perhaps the intentional, authentic, relevant embedding of the mechanics is perhaps a lower hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But it is important.
And actually, the ethical piece, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking they're really two different two domains completely. And ethics, digital citizenship, whatever you want to call it, I feel like that issue is just huge for our kids today. And I suspect it's not unique to our school. That's a lot of the issues a lot of the challenges, the SEL challenges that schools used to face are now happening in the digital environment or spilling over from the digital realm. And kids have such power with these tools without the experience and wisdom to know how to use them and understand the reach and impact of their use. That's an enormous challenge for schools, and I think one of the most important ones we can address. And we're talking about, we're rebooting our social emotional learning program at our school, and we're really trying to think about how can we weave that topic in the most meaningful way. And I think one of the big challenges for schools is that when the adults talk to the kids just don't sometimes feel like we really understand their world.
Yes.
And I wonder, how do we get students talking to students in a way that helps them raise their awareness and develop the kind of empathy that they need in order to use technology for good, as you would say.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up, because I've been in many situations where, teachers are teaching to their past and kids are sitting in the room and they're like, that has nothing to do with what I'm doing. This is not my world. And of course they go through the hoops. So I have two children that went through international schools, are adults now. And when you talk to them, they really say it was a marathon of hoop jumping. A lot of hoops to jump through. Yes, and don't talk about reflections. We reflected on the reflection. So it's just kind of interesting. I was in a professional situation where there was a room full of IT directors from many different international schools. And of course, the proverbial question was, what is your school doing? And everybody talked about kind of the positives, the excitement. Nobody said, oh, isn't it interesting that 9 companies in the world are in control of this information and technology? We have 4 in China and 5 in the US. And just the whole topic of ethics, it's almost, I feel, and we're not going to get into it because we'll spend another 9 hours here.
It's an awesome topic.
I just think the ethics is something that you brought up, and thank you, because I think we are underestimating. And one thing that I did react in that thing, I saw people, we had social media, we kind of ignored it. We kind of said, and teachers were like, well, that happens at home. And parents were like, well, it should be happening at school. And kind of, we were pushing the ping pong ball back and forth. And now you look at studies and there's some issues with loneliness, depression. There's just a lot that we know social media. And then we have this whole surveillance capitalism that's come on board, where behavior is now monitored and curated. And people are a little shocked. And I'm just thinking, well, here now we have AI. Let's maybe learn from that previous lesson. And Christina, I'm so happy that you highlighted the importance of ethics and how you weave that into, for example, your social emotional learning, a curriculum and things like that. I think schools really are understating or underestimating the long-term impact. And I think, social media is unfortunately a lesson learned that hopefully we can grow from. I don't know if you have a quick, because this is just opening a can of worms, I know.
Well, it is. I mean, and we all, I mean, it's not just IT directors that are own this area. I mean, we all own it as adults.
Right,
We
right.
all have to help support the students. And I think we have to find a way to reach them, learn from them, and model for them what
Yeah.
good use of technology can look like. I mean, we're not always so great at it
Right,
ourselves, I think.
No,
Um,
no, no.
Well, and
There's a
and
great
Christina,
quote by Mary Aiken, who's an author, says, "We ask the wrong question. We should be asking, when is it appropriate for a child to have a digital device? We should be asking, when is it appropriate for an adult to have a digital device in front of a child?"
Yeah, that's a great,
And
that's a great
I
observation.
really think that's something that we
right,
forget.
right.
I'm just mindful of time, and we're
Mhm.
going to come back and
Mm.
have a conversation about ethics, because I think that's
Okay.
unfair
Love
what
it.
I've done.
Well,
But
and I just have
know
to say though, Christina, you said something too about the kids that are students are, well, and John, you referenced it as well, that I think it's really important that we do engage our students much more, because we come at this sort of like, well, this, but
Yeah.
it's, is it resonating? Is it helpful? Is it right? Where are they really at?
Yeah.
Yeah. So engaging the students in this whole conversation is important.
Absolutely.
It's all about
I can't
them.
agree more. Yeah, it is. It's
Mm.
about student learning at the end of the day. In our audience, we are going to have IT directors that are starting for the first time. One of the exciting things about international schools, there are opportunities in your professional growth to take on new responsibilities, new roles. And I think all of us, well, I don't come from, I started as a kindergarten teacher in Los Angeles. So,
That's great.
so it's a very different, we come from different backgrounds. And what would be something that, here's an IT director, they're sitting in their new school and the year's starting. And of course, they very likely already busy. You don't walk into an IT director position cold. That's something very likely they've met people prior. And any just little ideas or quick reflection, or even for current IT directors that maybe has worked well for you, or maybe kind of a perspective or disposition that you would want to amplify and share with others?
Well, I'll tell you one thing right from the start, and that is grow your professional learning network. There are so many great colleagues out there that you can learn from and collaborate with. And I've benefited so much from, again, conversations with both of you and with others throughout my career. And you're not alone. It might feel like it sometimes when you're in your school because you're the only one in the position. And those relationships that you build externally and internally are really the bedrock of your success. And I'm sure many of the tech directors here would know that. It's not just about, as Charlotte said earlier, the tools that you have at your disposal, the resources. You can make a lot happen through relationships and values.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. Charlotte?
I jump on and say something similar and different. It's the people that matter. And so day one, listen, seek first to understand, and ask. You might have 10,000, and likely do, ideas and experiences how you want to improve what you see. But first, you really need to listen and understand.
Thank you. Wonderful. Both of you. Thank you so much. Just such a privilege to have all this wisdom shared today. And I really appreciate both of you coming and sharing. And I want to make sure people know there's show notes so you can read the bio. And also, I know Christina and Charlotte are always open if you want to reach out. As Christina was saying, the professional learning network is so important. So do take heed. Do check out the show notes. And if you want to connect with them, they'll be there. Thank you both. I wish you a very successful year ahead. and let's meet next year and see how things are. And we'll have, I promise we're going to do the thing on ethics, because
I
think
love it.
it'll be a meaty one. Yeah?
We'll hold you to it, John.
Love it.
Thanks.
And again,
Thank you.
show notes for the audience. Do check out Christina and Charlotte's bio and the resources that they share. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.